So now that we've already covered the basic terminology and definitions attached to many of the ideas that we're going to cover here in the rest of the class, we're going to dive in and finally look at some data. If you remember, there were two different types of variables that we talked about. There is a quantitative variable and there is a categorical variable. Here, for Module 2, 3, 4, and 5, we're going to focus on just looking at categorical variables. So let's first remind ourselves then what a categorical variable is. So a categorical variable is a variable whose responses consist of categories. And so if we look at some examples attached to this, we had gender, we would have your major, and then we also talked about some numbers like area code, even though they're numbers, actually told us something categorical. So it's technically a categorical variable. So again, we're just going to focus here first on looking at one categorical variable at a time, and we will do that through Module 4. So now that we have a categorical variable, we're going to talk about first just describing what we see with our variable. So we're going to first talk about some graphs. The two different types of graphs that we're going to cover are pie charts and bar charts. Or maybe referred to as a bar plot, depending upon who you talk to. And these plots you've usually seen before. We're just going to use software to demonstrate that. So this is the first time we're going to be using StatCrunch. So I already have here in our handout a pie chart and a couple of bar plots, but we're going to go through and show you first how I got these in StatCrunch, and then making sure we understand what they're actually showing us here as well. So at this point you should hopefully already be having your StatCrunch account, and then you want to log in to your account. And of course, there we go. So you'll be part of my StatCrunch group, and so through that there's already going to be some data sets associated with it. But right now I'm going to actually just load a file here as well. So the group that you'll want to be in is my NKU Stat 205 shared data group. And in here you'll have the data sets that we use for demonstration in StatCrunch, as well as the ones that you're going to need for the homework through iMath. So the data set that I'm going to be using here is the party data set. So I'm just going to click on that to load it. So that brings in my data set for me. In order to get a pie chart, we're just going to go to Graph, Pie Chart, and then since I do actually have the data, I'm just going to choose the With Data option. Click the variable that I want the plot of, and at this point I could just hit Compute and I'll get a pie chart. If I wanted to, I could add like a title to this as well. I could change this color scheme, all these other different things. So here's our pie chart. So what I can see from my pie chart quickly visually is that more than half were Democrat, not quite half were Republican, and I had less independents than anything else. Now what you'll see over here is numerically we're told that there were 64 Democrats, 12 independents, and 41 Republicans. And then it also tells me those percentages. So how did I calculate this 54.7%? Where I had to take the number I had divided by the total number of people. So if I take my 64 plus my 12 plus my 41, I can see we had 117 people. So if I take 64 and divide that by 117, that's where they're getting that 54.7%. So that's what our pie chart would look like. If instead I wanted to get a bar plot, I'm just going to go to Graph, Bar Plot, still again with data. Again, click the variable that I want, and at this point you can hit Compute, and you're going to get the first graph that we see here. So what this one defaults to is known as its frequency, which basically just means count or number. So remember over here I could see I had 64 Democrats. That number is actually up to 64, 12 independents, and 41 Republicans. Now if I'd want to, which can be nice, is there's this little option to click value above bar, which will be the same plot, but then actually puts the number so I can see the exact number for that. Here's where you might want to change it. So for example, I could change it to relative frequency, which is going to give me the proportions or decimals. So this 54.7% in decimal form is 0.547. So you're just seeing those numbers displayed differently here. You could also change this to percent if you like that better as well. So those are two different plots. Now, generally speaking, you could probably use either plot in any situation. Why might you use one over the other? If you have your categories are more similar in like the percentages and you want to be able to see those differences a little bit better, a bar plot's going to be a little bit easier to see the slight differences than you're going to possibly see in a pie chart. So it might be one benefit of using a bar plot in a situation over a pie chart. But a lot of people like pie charts because they're nice, easy, because they always add up to 100%. Right, so that's what our graphs would look like. Then we're also going to talk about numerical displays. So how can I numerically summarize my data? Well, there's two different ways we talk about that with categorical variable. We have counts or percentages. And I'd say for the most part, people prefer their percentages because, again, always out of 100%. So if I did this for my example, and I'll base this upon my pie chart that we have here as well. So I could say that of my 117 people sampled, we can see that 64 or 54.7% were Democrats. I'm just writing that out as I'm saying it here as well, but you can see the numbers in my StatCrunch a little bit better. 12 or 10.26% were independents. And finally, 41 or 35.04% were Republicans. And again, just as a reminder, so kind of like little things here, my sample size would be 117. That's my total number of people that I sampled. If I want to figure out where this 54.7% came from, if I take my 64, which was my number of Democrats, and divide that by my total sample size of 117, that would give me 0.547, or if I wrote it as a percentage, would be 54.7%. So let's go ahead and remind you some other notation. This would be a sample proportion. So these numbers would be what I would refer to as a p-hat, because they're sample proportions. Okay, so let's look at the full example here with a little bit more context and go through and review some of the older stuff we should have learned earlier in the module. So our full example reads, we were interested in looking at the party affiliation of people in northern Kentucky due to an upcoming May election. In order to do this, we sent a survey to 117 registered voters in northern Kentucky in April of 2017 and asked for their party affiliation and their gender. We already have our pie chart for party affiliation. I've also given us here the pie chart for gender, and I'll also recreate that in StatCrunch so we can read the numbers a bit better when we need them. But let's go through first and answer the questions based upon the earlier stuff in this module. So what is my goal? Why am I going out to collect data? Well, my goal is just to determine the party affiliation in northern Kentucky for the upcoming election. Right, that would be very useful because a lot of times we vote party lines, so it might be good to know those things. All right, sample, who did I actually collect data? Sorry, I'll move over here. Population, who is our group that we're interested in studying? While we're looking at registered voters in northern Kentucky, because you would need to be registered to have a party affiliation. And then our sample is just those that we collected data on. So our 117 registered voters in northern Kentucky. Now pausing here for a second, let's talk about if I need to worry about a selection bias here, or like the idea of that fundamental rule that we talked about before. I'm interested in looking at just registered voters in northern Kentucky. I sampled 117 registered voters in northern Kentucky. Does that seem good? All right, they're both registered voters in northern Kentucky. I know I didn't sample a lot, so you might not like my sample size necessarily. But I mean, I'm sort of sampling who I want to sample. So even though it's not a big sample size, I don't think it's biased in any way. Next, what variables did we collect? So now that we have a registered voter in front of us, what information did I get from them? I got their party affiliation, which we've already seen was a categorical variable. And we also got their gender, which would also be a categorical variable. Right, so I've covered the things that I have to know. I have to know why I'm collecting data, who I'm collecting data on, and what data I need to collect. Let's see what we know about when and where. Do I know anything about when and where? Well, when, I at least know that it was April of 2017. And all I really know about where is that it was northern Kentucky. So that covers sort of the older stuff. Now let's go about how would I summarize this data. I have my graphs, but we're going to write out in words how we would summarize it. So I'm going to start by telling you how much data I got, what my data is. So I'm going to start by telling you of our 117 registered voters in northern Kentucky. So I'm basically telling you who my sample actually is here. We found, and I'm going to summarize each of my pie charts separately. So I'm going to kind of go through and first rewrite the sentence I already have here, just because now I have context with it. So we found that 54.7% were Democrats, 10.26% were independents, and the rest, or 35.04%, were Republicans. I'm also going to summarize their gender, so I'm going to first recreate this pie chart that we have here. So I go back to my data set here. I'm just going to go create my pie chart. Now just the other variable of gender. So let's see, we can see a little bit less than half for women, a little bit more than half for men, but I'll record their exact numbers here. So I'll say, in addition, we also found that 43.59% were female, while 56.41% were male. And that would give me my quick summary here. Right, so now we know how to both graphically and numerically summarize a categorical variable. We know how to write that sentence in context. Now we're going to, in the next video, talk about actually sampling and the idea of how numbers can change based upon our sample